Okay, so we're going to keep, going on over what we were looking at last time. So we are still on this part, okay? And what we have to look at it is several things that will be probably less interesting to you than for many other people. But let me put it very clearly on what it is important right now. What is important is talk about the legal underpinnings of WTO. This is really what is the basic nature of the agreements and what the agreements mean, okay? So we're going to be following exactly what WTO itself says about the legal underpinnings. And what they're talking about is, what is the general purpose of GATT? That was to introduce disciplines. That's how they call it, okay? Basically, you are trying to discipline people to do things the way you want. So you are trying to introduce disciplines, which are the rules that you will be imposing, on restriction to trade so as to favor the liberalization of trade with a view to raising people's standard of living. Now that's the point that they make. And what we will be seeing right now is tariffs are to be reduced through reciprocal concessions and applied on a non-discriminatory manner.
What's an underpinning?
Sorry?
What's an underpinning?
Underpinning is what they are based on.
Like
Okay. Underpinning. So what you put, when you build a building, the underpinning is really the things that go under the earth and really keep it strong, okay? So you're going to be talking about the legal underpinnings of this thing. That's where they are pinned. That's where they are set, okay? And what you have right now is the general purpose of the GATT is basically to tell people we are going to be introducing discipline, but they call it disciplines, okay? Ways of doing things. So we're going to be defining what is it that is restricting trade, and we're going to be defining together how we're going to be opening and liberalizing. Now, that is the way they call it, disciplines, okay? We're going to be talking about goods, we're going to be talking about things that make sense. But the two things that are important for you is reciprocal concessions. I give you and you give me. So we're going to be doing that. And the other thing is they will be applied. So these are two different concepts. One concept is you and I are negotiating and we reach some agreement. Once we have reached that agreement, it's going to be reciprocal. You give me and I give you. But after we have finished that part, then how they apply is important too. And they should apply in a non-discriminatory manner. So we will not discriminate against anybody, okay? And this is important because that will be independently of the origin of the goods, okay? What we saw in class before is when we were putting together a regional trade agreement, you had rules of origin as part of the negotiation. So what you said on that particular point is, I'm going to allow you to bring things and goods from your country to my country on condition that a certain minimum of inputs utilized come from your country, my country, or any other country which is part of this agreement. That's a big difference, okay? Because what I'm talking right now is multilateral. And multilateral implies, I don't care where you bring the input from, I will allow this input to get into my country. Because basically what you're saying is, this is going to be a general agreement. So there is no need to define rules of origin in that one, because basically I'm accepting inputs from any place that you can think of. But that's not what you do in PTAs or RTAs or whatever you want to call it. What you do there is exactly the opposite. What you do is you define, well, if I'm going to be doing this, then I need to be sure that the content of that product that is going to be sold in my market has at least X% of inputs from the region. So this is what is called the most favored nation principle. Okay? Everybody will be. If I favor you and you are the most favored nation principle, you are my most favored nation because you and I negotiated, then I will have to make that extensive to everybody else. So it could be a one-on-one negotiation, but in the end it's going to be whatever I give you, whatever you give me, we give to the rest. This is very important because that principle implies non-discrimination. And what we're facing right now is, in many of the other agreements, is discrimination against third parties. So these two basic principles, negotiated tariffs applied on an MFN basis, are contained on Part 1 of the GATT. So when you look at the rules and regulations of GATT, part one of the definition of how GATT is operating is the schedule or the definition of this type of agreements. Part two is devoted to provision needed to preserve the value of the tariff concessions negotiated among the parties. Okay? So part one of the contract, if you want to call it that way, of GATT is where the definition of these two things is put together. Part two of that contract of GATT is something that we're going to be seeing through, which is you need provisions to preserve the value of the tariff concessions negotiated among the parties. Look at the wording, okay? We're not talking about the tariffs. We're talking about the tariffs concessions. What you are conceding, what you are giving me. So what I decided is I gave you the fact that you could bring your good into my country at 10% tariff. I used to do it at 20%, and now I'm going to be doing it at 10%. The concession is that 10% reduction in tariff. Okay? Once you do that, you need to make sure that the value of the tariff concessions will remain. And so what I talk in part two is the most fundamental of these obligations are two: the national treatment clause. As I treat my nationals, I treat you. The national treatment clause, and the prohibition against the use of quantitative restrictions at the border. So there are two things I need to make sure that will happen. One of them is, whatever I do for my own citizens, I will do for the citizens of any country. Okay? So if I say, my citizen can bring with 0% tariff, then that means that everybody else should bring it with 0% tariff. But the second thing, which is very important, is I will not impose quantitative barriers. Because then what I will transform will be, oh yeah, well, I can bring a good and I say to you, sure, you bring me autos with a 10% tariff. Okay? So what I'm going to say is, let's suppose that before I had an 80% tariff. And I decided to agree on a concession, and the concession was, I bring down the tariffs on cars from 80% to 10%. And you will say, this is great, because what it implies is, whereas before I was selling 1,000 cars because of the impact of the 80% tariff, which reflected a different price once the product was inside my country, okay? When I bring down the tariff to 10%, the price of that car sold in my country is not going to be X plus 80%, it's going to be X plus 10%, which implies the price of the car after I made the concession in my country will go down. See? So price goes down, and that implies at that moment that I'm going to be able to sell not 1,000, but let's just suppose 10,000 cars. Okay? And then I say, wait a minute. When you get into the border, I only admit 3,000 cars because I'm going to impose a quota on imports on cars from your country. If I do this, what I'm really doing, okay, is basically you are not preserving the value of the tariff concessions negotiated. Is that part clear? First address, no?
I didn't understand.
Yeah. Let me see if I can make a numerical example then, okay? In a graph, what you have is your supply and your demand, okay? So you're going to have price and you're going to have quantity. Okay? So you know that your demand for this product, let's say this is the demand for cars, at a higher price, you have less cars. At a lower price, obviously, you have more cars. Yeah? So this will be the demand for cars at price 1. Okay? That's demand for cars 1. And when I bring the price down, yeah, that will be the demand. Demand for cars at price 2. Obviously, because I have a certain supply and a certain demand, there is a market equilibrium. At that market equilibrium, if I allow the market to function, this is basic economics, okay? I'm going to have the price of equilibrium, and I'm going to have the demand for cars on equilibrium. This is fine, and then someone comes and says, well, we are going to be imposing a tariff because I'm getting too many cars. So I go and I say, well, this is the price that you have. But what I'm going to do now is, when I'm talking about the demand and the supply, this is the demand of my country. But the supply that I'm getting is for cars that are coming from outside my country. Yeah, so this is outside. I don't produce cars. I just bring them from outside. Just to make it easy. Otherwise, we have to this break and demand everything else. But let's suppose that I do say that all the supply of cars that gets into my country comes from outside. Okay? Okay, if I leave free trade and I don't impose a tariff, this is the price. Okay? But then I said, this is too many cars and it's creating a problem in my balance of payments. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to reduce the deficit in my balance of payments, and the reduction in the balance of payments is going to be made through the imposition to the supply of cars who comes from outside of a tariff. What is the tariff going to do in terms of the supply of cars? What it will do is really will be the impact as if there was a reduction of supply. Because basically what it does is, at all points on the curve, the cost of producing that car is the same, but when I look at it from the inside consumer in my country, because I'm applying a tariff, it is as if the cost had increased. Basically what the government is doing is shifting the demand, supply plus tariff. Okay? Now, is that money going to the producer of cars in the other country? No. All the extra money that this will create, in the sense of the triangle of loss of welfare, as we call it in economics, will be money that the government takes. Okay? Because in fact, the real supply curve which is coming from outside is this. The artificial supply curve that I just created through the imposition of the tariff is this. And as I do that, for a consumer in my country, the price of the car is S plus T. But in reality, for the producer of the car, the money they get is only S. T is the money that the government keeps for himself. Okay? And so when I make this, I'm going to find a new value. Maybe I should use another color. What I'm saying basically is, let me change to colors, okay? So we can have different colors. What we did is we changed the supply to that supply. So we change also the price to that price. Okay? As you know, this is really something which is artificial. And what it creates a loss of welfare at some point. And the loss of welfare is the loss of welfare that is going to get who? Who's going to get the guy who now, all of a sudden, what you have is a difference between what the real price was and therefore what the guy is going to be getting and what I'm going to be getting. And all this is an area that's going to be now distributed between the government and the producers. Okay? Who pays that? The consumer. Because in the end, the consumer is paying more. That's why we call that the triangle, the loss of welfare in the economy. Okay? Because that's the amount that was lost by the consumer. But I'm not doing this because I do have a regard enough for the consumer. What I'm doing is I have a problem with balance of payments, so I'm imposing that tariff. I'm reducing, therefore, everything else. And I do that. So when I start negotiations, this is my point. Okay? I'm doing negotiations now and walking with the guy who produced cars and says, okay, let's make a negotiating. I'm going to be sitting with you, and we're going to be talking cars, and we're going to be talking in terms of cars. What you and I will negotiate. You and I will negotiate then that any car that is brought into my country will have a 0 tariff. Okay, if you do that, you go back to this point. Okay? And as you go back to that point, what you really are saying is, now we are back to where the best solution is. If you do that, what you are talking about is several things. First, as we made the reduction in tariffs in a negotiating between you and I, we have to be sure that, according to the Part 1 of the GATT agreement, 2 things happen. One of them is, as I do that, it will be in a non-discriminatory manner, which implies I will accept any car from any place at 0 tariff. Okay? So that will be independent of the origin of the goods. This is the most favored nation principle. But I only negotiated with the United States. Yeah, but I mean, I'm sorry. If you are negotiating on a multilateral basis within the realm of WTO or GATT before, but now WTO, because in fact, once we created WTO, we kept all the agreements of GATT, and we just put those agreements, the agreement on goods. Okay? And so what happens is, by doing that, I have to maintain MFN base. Most favored nation. You are my most favored nation because you and I made the negotiation. But once we agreed, I have to apply the same principle to all the rest of the nations. Okay? And therefore, any car that comes to my country will come with a 0 tariff. For simplicity, what I'm doing right now in the example is saying there is only 2 countries. You produce cars, I demand cars, and therefore we're doing this. But in the reality of the world, there are many countries which produce cars, which implies if you give that to them, you also give it to me. And so I can now bring my car into your market at 0 tariff, any country. As you do that, you go back to this place. As you reach that point, what you're going to be facing there now is this situation back to normal, if you wish, and that's the gain that you have. The gain on what? Is the value of the tariff concession negotiated. Yeah? You are back to the recovery of all the section. The consumers now are enjoying everything. And whereas before this part was only for the government, this part was for the producer, and you were losing this triangle, okay? Now that triangle is back to the consumer. This is the gain from the concession, okay? You gain from the concession. You gain as a consumer, but also the producer gain as a producer. Because whereas before he only got this amount, now he's going to be getting the full amount. So there are gains from the concessions. Once you reach an agreement, the consumer gains and the producer of the good also gains. Okay? As you make that combination of gains from the concession, what you have to do according to Part 2, this is the legal agreement, okay? According to Part 2, the law of GATT will tell you, once you have done that, you cannot do other things that will make this back to this point. How can you do that? Well, I can simply say, I don't treat foreigners as I treat nationals, but that's discriminatory, and therefore, sorry. Any national or any foreigner who wants to bring a car into the market can do it in the same conditions, because otherwise only nationals could do it. Okay? Or I can say, look, nationals can bring the car paying 0 tariff, foreigners will have to pay the 10% tariff. You have to do the same for everybody. But the second thing is, don't use any other trick to reduce the number of cars in your country. And the other trick is, I impose quantitative barriers. So I say, sorry, I will only allow you to bring into my market. It's no longer a question of price. I decide now that, by own decision, you can only bring to my country DC quota. This is the number of cars that you can bring into my market, not because of the price, but because of a quota restriction. The quota says you only go from 0 to DCQ. Okay? Whereas before, when you had no quota, without quota, you had 0 to DC equilibrium. Okay? Obviously, this is larger than that. I'm sorry, this is smaller than that. Okay? And so what happens is, because I impose a quota, which is not a tariff, it's a quantitative barrier, I am having an impact which in itself does not preserve the gains from the tariff concessions. Okay? Yeah? Yes? You had a question? No?
And what about the standards? Like standards also?
Yes, so I can invent a lot of things that will bring you to a solution, which is you should not be doing those things. Okay? Because if you start putting all those things, which are called quantitative barriers or non-trade barriers, if you want the term, NTBs, then you are using artificial measures to reduce the possibility of the gains that have already been obtained by the concessions negotiated. Yes?
There's an issue still going on about the tomatoes, right? Exported to the
In Mexico.
United States.
That's a good case, okay? So what the Americans did, they came and they said, look, there is dumping. We're going to be seeing that. There is dumping in your country. What do you mean by dumping? The way that you produce tomatoes in your country is making artificially cheaper those tomatoes in my country. So what you are doing is, whenever a person is exporting to the United States, you are giving them a subsidy. And by doing that, you are creating dumping into my economy. You are using my market to dump all of that you don't want in your country. So your producers can produce 10 billion tomatoes, yeah? But once they reach the limit of what number of tomatoes people eat in Mexico, 5 billion, the other 5 billion you have to dispose of. How do you dispose of them? The government comes to you, gives you a subsidy, and that subsidy then translates into a cheaper price once it is brought into my market. And therefore, you are dumping goods on my economy. When you do that, this is not allowed. This is another way of doing this kind of business, okay? Different now, because what you're doing is you are dumping on my market. So people will say, well, wait, you cannot dump, because if you do that, I am a tomato grower in the United States, and I am facing unfair, that name that we love so much, unfair competition. And therefore, you, my government, go to the WTO, and you tell them that there is dumping, and therefore, because there is dumping, you are justified to impose a tariff on products coming from Mexico, tomatoes. Now, you are a producer of tomatoes. Bless you. How long will it take for this discussion to take place in WTO dispute settlement system? And I am the Mexican government, and I come to you, well, Maybe if we're fast and everything goes right and we can demonstrate and everything else, let's say a year. Okay? So you sit there and you think, let me see, I'm going to have all these tomatoes in my garden, okay? And by the time this discussion ends, it will take a long time. So what Mexico or the United States does is the United States starts immediately a proceeding, goes to the dispute settlement of WTO, indicates that Mexico is dumping, brings demonstrations, numbers, and says, I'm going to therefore impose a tariff. You go and you say, this is not true, it's unfair, the Americans are lying, and therefore I am going to defend myself. But this is what I'm doing as a producer of tomato? No, as a government, okay? So the producer of tomato comes to me and says, wait, how long it will take? 1 year. But we're going to win, don't worry. Yeah, well, I do worry about what? What do I worry about?
Because in 1 year, your tomatoes are...
And so you walk to the government and say, look, let's reach an agreement. So many, as you saw in the last video, many of the disputes that you have, I don't remember exactly the number we saw last time, but I think it was almost 60% of those, are settled out of court. Okay? And what you do is you walk and you say, like we did right now. You walk to the United States and says, give me a break. This is not true. You know it's not true. You're going to lose. And the Americans say, well, look. Yeah, but you know what? These guys are from Florida. These guys are from this. These guys are from... And they are really putting a lot of pressure on my congressmen. And so the congressmen are coming, and they are really giving me a hell of a time. And so I took a decision. And the decision was, it's your problem. You show me that you are not dumping. Politics are played in the game, okay? And that's the reason why the system has to work, because then what it will do, the system, is I am going to defend myself, and you're going to lose. And when you lose, you will have to compensate me for the loss, okay? So it may take a year, it may take 2 years, but I'm going to win. When I win, you, the government of the United States, will have to compensate. And you will have to give me the money that I'm going to show you my tomato growers lost because of this artificial imposition, using an argument which was false, dumping. But the tomato growers will grow impatient, okay? So they will come to you and say, well, wait. Why don't we reach an agreement? Because I don't want to lose all my production of this year, and I have no idea how much money I'm going to get 2 years from now. So let's settle. And then you sit with them and say, are you sure you want to settle? Yes, I want to settle. Okay, but what will be the limit? And then you go and you make agreements. And as you get an agreement, you get an agreement like the one that we got right now, which is a price agreement. Which is, look, it's going to take me too long to show you that there's no dumping. So let's take a deal. You are saying that the price is 10, because that's what you are doing with your tariff. I'm saying that the price is 5, because that's really what I can produce. Let's split it, okay? And so let's go to a deal. And I, as a tomato grower from the Mexico, see, I'm willing to accept a price of 6. And of course, there's going to be a tomato grower from the USA who's going to say, no, 9. And you start negotiating. And you end up in, I don't know, let's say 7. Once you reach that, everybody says, fine, let's do it at 7, okay? And then you go and you tell these guys, guess what? We just agreed to a price solution. This is agreed between the two countries, between the two tomato growers associations, and therefore it has been settled out of court. End of story. And WTO.
This is closed after that.
Yeah, because there was an agreement out of court. Okay. Now, if I don't remember correctly, I may be wrong. Okay. But when we were looking at the video, they said about 60% of the cases are settled out of court, because this is what happens. I mean, you don't want to waste your time. And so the producers of your country come and say, let's reach an agreement. It's better a bad agreement than a good win, because by the time that we win, I am broke. Okay?
So the courts should be more efficient, right? So
But the problem, let me give you an example of the problem, okay? It's very interesting. This is the real case, okay? So we are discussing between Mexico and the United States. At the time I was Secretary of Economy, and we were discussing. I have all of a sudden the Poultry Association coming and saying, the Americans are doing dumping on us. And that's the reason why in the supermarkets you buy so many American products. Because basically what they do is they bring a chicken, okay, and they cut chickens in pieces. Now Mexicans love legs and wings, okay? Americans love the rest of the animal, okay? So when you go to an American supermarket, you will see all these packages, and what they do have is certain parts of the chicken, okay? And when you come to Mexico, you see the other parts of the chicken. So what they will do is they will say, well, look, we can sell this in Mexico. I forgot now the name for pechuga, but pechugas in the United States at the price of $2, and that makes me a lot of money. So I can now sell wings and legs in Mexico at a very low price because I'm making a lot of money, and whatever I do now is extra. And these Mexicans really love legs and wings, so let's send them legs and wings. Okay? So what they do is they separate in packages, and so you get all these packages with that part of the animal that is not really wanted in the United States. And what you do is you get this thing, and then people in Mexico say, well, that reduces the demand for our own chicken because Mexicans are buying legs and wings of chickens from the United States which are being dumped into our market. And they are being dumped because they sell the other part at a high price, and they then dump the rest. This is a true case, okay? So they came and they said, this is unfair. Let's close the market to American poultry products. And so you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, okay, is it true or is it not true? Honestly, you have no idea. So what you say is, well, it sounds reasonable because my friends of Bachoco and all these companies in Mexico come to me and say, yes, it is true, because it takes this much to produce a chicken. Here are the prices, here are the documents, here's everything, and look at the price that they are putting the chicken legs and what have you in the market. And therefore, yes, there is dumping. So you use that element, and you go to Geneva and say, the Americans are dumping, I'm closing my market to them. Okay? The Americans are going to jump. And so you start having all this combination of chicken legs or no chicken legs, okay? And at the end, you have to demonstrate. But the other problem that you have is, on top of that, you have to demonstrate how much was the loss to the Mexican producers because of the sales they didn't make, given the fact that these guys sold the product. So we're talking one kind of discussion, okay? We did that, and we went through the whole thing, and we finally reached an agreement because the Americans came and said, well, let's make an agreement. Let's make a price agreement. What is the price then that we should be sending? And in a way, what you're doing then is you are sharing the market through agreements, because in the end, it will take a long time to get the other result. In some cases, you go all the way. But in many cases, you simply do it differently, okay? Now, for the Americans, it's going to be also difficult because they will have to demonstrate that they didn't do dumping. So when you look at that, yes, courts are inefficient, but the system is very efficient because what it does, it forces you to reach an agreement and solve the problem, okay? Whereas GATT, when it was only GATT, you didn't have that. It could take forever. Here there are time limits. And because everybody knows that there are time limits and that you could lose in the end and then have to compensate, then you will reach an agreement out of court. You know the saying in Spanish, ¿eh? Es mejor un mal arreglo que un buen triunfo. ¿Por qué? Because if I spend my time with lawyers, not only do they collect from my money, from fees, but in addition, I may end up years and years and years in court. Now, the court is operating quite efficiently, but at the same time, it's never efficient depending on your product. If it is a product that will be basically going to waste in 6 months, you want to reach an agreement. There was a hand? Yeah?
I just wanted to know, provisions, when it says provisions, you mean rules, law?
Yeah, and we will see that in a while, okay? So what we're talking about right here is tariffs are an acceptable form of protection for the national industry against foreign competition, whereas quantitative non-trade barriers is not an acceptable manner because it's much more difficult to really go outside of this. So if I impose the standards, if I impose this, and all of those elements are elements which are worse than tariffs. Because tariffs, I can see the effect. Okay? And I can see the gains very quickly. Here is very complicated to find what is the effect, how it's going to be creating that difficulty. Quotas is very easy to see because you can see the impact right away. But other kind of non-trade barriers becomes very complicated. That's what is making complicated our system of trade. But in the end, what you have is access rules, which is important, okay? So what we're talking about is, whenever we're talking about some of the terms that we'll be using is market access needs rules. And those are the negotiations we're going to be making, okay? So you always have a contracting party that can have a certain limit to deviation, but in the end, you can use safeguards, okay? And then you have regional trade agreements, and then you have anti-dumping and countervailing measures against unfair trade. And then you have protection of health, protection of the environment, and as you start making this list, you see what we are talking about, okay? In the end, what we're talking about is market access. Will you or will you not give me access to your market? And so the whole discussion in trade is, am I getting access to your market or not? Under what conditions am I getting access to your market? Am I getting access to your market on the same conditions as a national? Or I'm getting access as a non-national? Because do we impose quotas, tariffs, standard regulations, etc., to Mexicans when they sell chicken in the market or not? Yes. What do you impose to the Mexicans? Sanitation rules. What sanitation rules? This, this, this. Okay. Those are the same rules that you should be applying to a product coming from outside the country. Whether it is from Russia, whether it is from Honduras, or whether it is from the United States, the same sanitation rules that you impose to your nationals, you will have to impose to the foreigners. And then you come and you say, yeah, but you know what? In Honduras, there are these kind of diseases that we don't have. And therefore, that's the reason why I'm not allowing this product coming from Honduras. So you're inventing ways of not allowing market access to foreigners into your market. Okay? So the whole discussion is market access rules. But what you're seeing now is we have now created conditions in which regional trade agreements, safeguards, anti-dumping and countervailing measures, protection of health, protection of environment, unfair trade, all these things become then complications for the trade system. Then you also go and you say, I also like to be a nice guy. So you want to be a nice guy? I open a chapter for you. And that chapter is called Part 4 of the GATT. Okay? And that has transformed itself into what is called the enabling clause. Okay? These are specific provisions for developing countries which are included in the WTO agreement. We're going to go into the WTO by itself so you can see it clearly. So people are looking at things and names which are important. MFN basis, market access rules, enabling clause. These are all terms which you need to understand, okay? Because what it implies is this is the way the trade moves in the world. And you're going to be working in companies that will be doing this all the time. So, under WTO, these basic market access principles and the related exceptions, as well as institutional provisions, were adapted to the specificity of trade in services and trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. In the preamble to the agreement established in WTO, the objectives of this new organization are stated as such, with a view to raising the standards of living, ensuring employment and a large and steadily growing volume of real income and effective demand, and expanding the production of and employment and trade in goods and services, while allowing for the optimal use of the world's resources in accordance with the objectives of sustainable development, seeking both to protect and preserve the environment and to enhancing the means for doing so in a manner consistent with the respective needs and concerns at different levels of economic development. This is beautiful. Okay? This is the dream. This is what we should be doing. This is the reality. So when I go and I say, well, the WTO was created to impose rules and conditions on small countries on developing countries, the answer is, of course not. Look at the preamble, okay? And the preamble tells you very clearly what it is built for. Happiness, goodness, fairness, greatness for everybody. Because everything is there. But this is what will be imposing conditions. Okay? Any question? Yeah.
If WTO like fosters trade and everything, why do they allow like all the non-trade barriers?
That's a good question. Yeah? Because in reality, what I'm going to be doing is I'm starting for a situation where they already existed. Yeah? So it's not that I am the priest, okay? So I come and tell you, you have to be good, you have to be nice, never cheat on your husband, never do this, never do that, okay? And I preach. And then I come and I find the world where you are already doing this, you are already doing that. So I say, well, wait, let's then do it slowly. We're going to bring you into the good behavior slowly. Because if I try to do it very strongly, it won't happen. So the rounds of negotiations, as you saw, took longer and longer and longer as you move into the parts that were more difficult to handle. Because in the end, I am Mexico, I am the Mexican government, and you are an enterprise which is working in Mexico. When I convince you to come and invest in Mexico, I'm not saying that you're Mexican, you're a foreign company. You come to Mexico because I told you that I will be giving you certain concessions. You made your program of investment and benefits, rate of return, etc., that you will do, based upon the promise of what you told me that you will be giving me. And I told you that there will be no cars imported in Mexico for the next 20 years. And therefore, if you put your shop in Mexico, your factory, then you will be the only one selling cars in Mexico. That was really what we did, okay? So you brought all these companies to make investments in Mexico. Many companies like Renault, who used to sell cars in Mexico a long time ago, came, looked at the market and said, no way, I'm not going to make this investment and produce Renaults if already is there General Motors, Chrysler, Ford, Volkswagen. So this is no business for me, I'm leaving your country. So for a long, long time, I mean, you have no idea because you're too young, but what happened to you is you walk into Mexico, you see all these cars and you think that it was like that forever. No. 30 years back, you couldn't buy certain cars because they were not in the market. And if you wanted to bring them from outside, they were either subject to a huge tariff or they were subject to quotas. And the quotas in many cases were zero because the point that was made is for you to put your factory, I'm going to give you full protection. So companies like Chrysler, Ford, GM, Volkswagen, abide by that principle. They set up a factory and they were selling cars in Mexico. They were the only ones selling cars in Mexico for a long, long time. Then all of a sudden you had this reformist government that came and said, well, this is not right for the country, this is not good for the industry, this is not good for the consumer. So I'm going to be opening the market. Well, if you have been sitting here for X number of years, your immediate thing and reaction is, if you do that, all these people who are employed in my company will lose their jobs. So I'm not going to be saying this. I'm just going to go and talk to the leader of that labor union, and I will tell him what's going to happen to him. He's going to be without a job, by the way, because what's going to happen is I'm going to go bankrupt. There's going to be no workers that he can represent. So the first person that will be opposed to opening is the representative of the labor union, because the guy will know exactly what's going to happen to him, or to her in some case, which is what? You walk into this place, they open this thing, you lose power, because now you have less workers or you have zero workers. Either you lose your job or you lose power. So I used to represent a labor union of 20,000 people. Now I'm representing a labor union of 2,000 people. Am I more powerful or less powerful than before? I'm less powerful, okay? And therefore, this is what is called the entrenched interest. These are things that do not respond to economics. And you will deal with that all day long, because you are going to be working in companies. So you start saying no. And so what I need to do is say, well, I'm going to give you a chance to apply these things slowly. So I'm going to be I'm asking you to open your market, but I understand your concerns. So what I will do is, I will give you a schedule, that's how it's called, through which in the next, 20 years, you will be reducing from 100% tariff to a 5% tariff. This is the concession that you gave me. Okay? The concession goes from 100 to 5 is 95. But I also put a schedule. And that schedule implies in year 1, you are going to go from 100 to 90. In year 2, you are going to go to 85. In year 3, you are going to go to... And these are binding tariffs. Once you and I have agreed, these are the binding tariffs. These are the tariffs that will be. This is the tariff that will be the binding tariff in the end. The applied tariffs are the ones that we are applying effectively. And I need to give you those things. But in addition, there's going to be certain concessions that you will be asking from the general rule. So as you move in this thing, I have to create provisions to allow you the timing, the possibility, so you can work in this thing. Because otherwise what I'm going to find out is that you're going to say, I'm not getting in. Because if I get in, I lose too much too quickly. And politically, I cannot handle that. Now, of course, if you're a dictator and you don't care and you have full control of the country, maybe you can do it. The question is, will you? I mean, if you have riots on the streets, what are you going to do? Are you going to stop them by shooting them all, or what? Are you going to put the labor union leader in jail? Well, sometimes they did that. So what you are doing is you are fighting against entrenched interest groups, which already are getting benefits from the situation they had originally. And what you're asking is moving into different situations. And I'm going to start using all kinds of arguments. I'm going to say to you that you are going to bring cars now, which are cars, second class, second rate, that they will not be used in the United States, but now you are allowing them to bring into Mexico. And because of that, they are dumping cars into the Mexican territory, which is exactly what's happening right now. And the point that I'm opening the market in the United States for used cars to be brought into Mexico. As I allow used cars to be brought into Mexico, I have to set up conditions for those used cars. Yeah? Because otherwise, you have a market in the United States which changes about 2 to 3 million cars easily in the market. And then you have cars from 15 years old that will be brought into Mexico. I mean, you can see those cars being driven in Mexico, don't you? So the question is, are they being dumped into our market, or should we have the rules and the reasons for having only new cars in Mexico? A car with a technology of 15 years back, you all know that it's a technology that will be polluting the country. So then you come and you say, well, then I impose standards on environment. But if I do that, I cannot bring the cars which are coming to contaminate. And he said, sure, but isn't that what you are doing in your country? Is it or is it not the rules that you're having in your country? Yes. Okay, so the same rules, so I'm not discriminating. Okay?
But I understand the polluting problem, but I don't see a problem with the dumping. In the end, if a market is willing to pay for a good, then why should the government say that it's unfair?
Because it is unfair to the people who produce the product in your own country. Okay? What I'm saying to you is, look, I'm going to be hiring you, even if you are a woman. No. You're hiring me not because I am a woman or a man, okay? I mean, today is the day of the Women's Day rights. I have the same rights as a man, so don't discriminate against me. I'm going to say, fine, that's no problem. But then you're going to say, well, but then I need these qualifications on people. I'm not going to discriminate by gender, but I'm not going to do reverse discrimination either. So if you want to be hired, you need to have a PhD, okay? Then your question will be, yeah, but are you asking that from everybody or just from women? No, I'm asking it from everybody. Okay, if it is from everybody, there is no discrimination. In the case of dumping, think of this way. What I will be doing is, I will prepare a lot of people, and then I will be, because I don't have jobs, I will say to them, look, if you take a job in the United States, I'm going to be giving you a subsidy of $10,000. So you can take a job in the United States for $10,000 less than any American would. You have the same credentials, but you have an advantage. I'm giving you $10,000 because what I want is you to go to the United States. If I do that, I'm dumping you into that market, okay? What I'm doing is I'm throwing you there, and I'm giving you a subsidy so you go there. Think about a person equal to you on the other side. I say, wait a minute, I mean, this is unfair. Because what's happening is she's getting the job, not because she's better or whatever. She may be equal to me, but has one big advantage. She's going to be asking $10,000 less than I will. And so this is affecting me, and it's called dumping. You are dumping that person in my market. You are creating unfair competition for me. And therefore, that should not be allowed. Yes, that should not be allowed. Think about the problems that this will create. Exchange rate policies will be very important then. Because if I am convinced that you are using the exchange rate to reduce the price of your goods in my market, in my currency, then this is an unfair advantage. It has nothing to do with competitiveness, etc. It has to do with the fact that you are manipulating the exchange rate so that your goods will be cheaper in my country. That was the whole discussion during the presidential campaign in the United States on how am I going to be treating China once I'm president. Well, look at how they are trying to treat in China. They didn't do anything anyway, okay? But during the campaign, it was very interesting because it was the position of saying, I will immediately accuse China of using the exchange rate to dump things into our market. That sounds very nice. I mean, if you are one of the guys who are facing competition from the Chinese products, then you think, I'm going to vote for this person because that person immediately is going to help me. Whether it's correct or wrong, it's irrelevant, okay? So all these discussions about dumping and all these things are going to be there. There's going to be safeguards, okay? I want to make sure that something's going to happen in my country, okay? I'm going to be then putting all these kind of countervailing measures. Proving dumping is very complex because what it implies is you have to show me that you really have lower costs than I do. If not, then I'm going to be using all kinds of excuses. I'm going to say that you give subsidies. And last class, we just saw how much subsidies are given to the agricultural products in developed countries. So if I'm a developing nation, what I'm saying is, wait a minute, let's discuss agricultural goods, because that's what I produce. And I produce agricultural goods at a lower price than any of these guys will. Simply for many reasons, okay? And so you really want to help me? Let's go for agricultural goods. And what we saw last class also was, in that table that you will get today, is the area where there were the peakest, the most number of peaks on tariffs was agriculture, because it is a very protected sector in developed nations, both the United States and the European Union. And so the European Union says, well, but I really want to help my friends in Africa. So I'm going to be giving them preferential treatment. And they can then bring products into my market at zero tariff. Then immediately the United States is going to say, wait a minute, why? Well, because they are poor. I may be rich, but I have my agricultural sector. Then the Europeans will say, yeah, but you are giving subsidies in your agricultural sector. But you too, and so you start giving these products, okay? So all these boxes will be open when you go into the negotiating process. That's why you need the legal system, and the legal system is telling you what are the basic principles. If you look at the basic principles, every basic principle is clear to reach this goal. And then you say, but look at all these exceptions that they are creating. Yeah, because they need those exceptions, because otherwise trade does not move. Okay? So that's part of what we are going to be seeing in this document, which I will send to you also, okay? Because I think it's the best document that I've seen that in a very, it's a little bit long, so we're going to take this class and next class, but it is one of the best documents in that sense because it was produced by WTO, okay? So let's use it. Okay, the document, you can get it in the World Trade Organization webpage, but I will send you anyway the document to you. It's called exactly like that, WTO Legal Underpinnings, and it's written by Gabriel Marceau, which is a lawyer in WTO. What is this? So she gives a background and she says, look, the reason why we have the system that we have now is because there was war. The Second World War indicated that we need to do something about trade. And so what you will see in this note that I'm going to open right there is how was the beginning and what is called the Havana Charter, which is the first negotiating round where GATT surges, okay? And then what GATT means, and what it means in terms of the never-born ITO. It was born dead, okay? And what is the difference between GATT in the two regions. So here it is. Well, okay. So what she says is that basically what became clear after the Second World War in the Bretton Woods Conference is that you needed to have trade and that you had to stop this concept of beggar thy neighbor trade, which was, please give me this, please give me that. Look, we need a system where people will not have to be begging for some kind of treatment. And that was really a conception that was born after the Second World War. The best point that was made was by this guy called Garner to say, if goods don't cross the borders, soldiers will. Okay? Because many of the concepts of what happened after the Second World War is we discovered that because we were trying to create too many conditions on trade from many nations, we gave trouble to all of them. And then what she says is the Havana Charter was the draft for International Trade Organization and that's what is called the Havana chapter, okay, was completed by the end of August 1947. That was the negotiations in Havana. Before there were bad guys, people would go to Havana. And so they did this thing, they signed the treaty, and the ITO, which was created on Chapter 7 of that charter, this Havana Charter, was going to be the central organization of the United Nations, responsible for coordinating the various aspects of international economic cooperation among states. So when you look at that, you understand one thing. We were creating the United Nations, and we were creating, as part of the United Nations system, the ITO. So it is part of a system where the IMF, the World Bank, and ITO were arms of the United Nations to really reach better life conditions in the world. The negotiations were concluded in the autumn of 1947, and there were 23 countries signing. They are called contracting parties. They enter into the contract, okay? And then what happens? Exactly what we're talking. In 1950, the United States Congress didn't like it anymore. Okay? And as it happens, then the administration of the United States, the executive branch, quietly issued a press release in which it stated that it will not be resubmitting the charter to Congress for approval. And so, after that, there was not much that the other countries will be interested in, because the biggest country, the country that really was making life easier for everybody at that time, 1950, was the United States. I mean, if you don't enter the game, then why we should play? Because we are so small, you are big, you are the one who we want to have. So in the end, what you see is ITO did not happen, but people were convinced that you need to do it, so GATT happens, okay? And so what happens is GATT starts going on, and for 50 years you have this contractual relationship between GATT and so the key question of market access at the beginning was tariffs. Okay? So what you will see then in terms of the basic rules of that, and I will send you this, and you will find all this explanation in these notes, okay? And what you will be facing very quickly is, what are the basic rules of GATT? We just saw them, okay? What types of tariffs can you have? Well, you prefer tariffs that will be imposed on price, because what that will do is really will create less distortion in the kind of market that we're talking about. And then, what are the kind of tariffs that we have? We have binding tariffs, the ones that you're supposed to be reaching, and applied tariffs, the ones that you're really applying over time. And so Article 2 is going to define this binding of tariffs. Okay? So tariff bindings, the Article 2 is the first basic principle of the GATT, and what it says is binding of tariffs. And it says that contracting parties cannot collect at the border tariffs at levels higher than the maximum level committed of the maximum binding or the bound level. So you negotiate maximums, and once you have each contracting party committed itself to a maximum level of tariffs, we say that the tariff level for that product was bound. The negotiation goes as follows. Country A explains to country B that when it exports tables to country B, they will be admitting. So everything that we just talked, you're going to find here. This is the lecture for this section, okay? If you read this, which I'm going to be sending you, you're going to be in heaven at the time of the exam, okay? So the whole point is, as you go in that, you're going to be looking at all the concepts, reciprocity, which is the central point that we just saw a little while ago in the big table, okay? And as you will see that is, you have a decision of contracting parties known as the enabling clause. It means that developing countries should not be expected in the course of trade negotiations to make contributions which are inconsistent with their individual development, financial, and trade needs. So the enabling clause is simply the fact of the exception. Okay? Because when I look at countries which are in a level of development which is less than mine, I must acknowledge that difference. And what I do is I created what is called the enabling clause. Okay? So as you move into the process of all these things, what you will see is that some countries are not fulfilling the reciprocity concept, because we allow them to have what is called here less than full reciprocity. And that's what is called the enabling clause. Okay? I'm enabling you to be different from me. Whereas I will move faster, you can move slower. So we all agree to reduce tariffs from 100% to 0. I will do it in 5 years. You can take 20 years. I am enabling you to do that because I recognize your level of development. Again, many of the criticism that we get is because people really don't know and don't really read this clause. Because in the end, you do have the legal instruments to move differently. Now, of course, you go into negotiation and a guy from Bangladesh comes and says to you, well, yeah, but I will be taking my time. So you open your market for my cloth industry in 1 year, and I will open the market for, let's say, corn, in 300 years. And I will do it the following way. For 200 years, I will do nothing, and in the last 100 years, I will do it 1% per year. Basically, you're going to say, give me a break, okay? We're not really joking. We are serious on this one. But you will not believe it. I mean, in these negotiations, some people start like that. So you say, don't do that. Let's really bound ourselves, okay? But the enabling clause allows you to do that, okay? And this is an endless discussion. You can spend all the time. And so in the end, okay, tariff negotiations and renegotiations says, since the first GATT round of negotiations, every 3 years or so, GATT contracting parties have been negotiating the tariffs commitments down in the context of rounds of negotiations. Today, after 50 years, the average tariff on industrial goods in developed countries is less than 4% as tariff bindings, okay? And they can be increased through renegotiation. In this case, however, compensation will have to be paid to those export members who suffer the most from a reduced market access. Again, the principle that your legislation cannot contradict what we agreed. Okay? So I can renegotiate and say, look, I really need for the next 2-3 years to increase tariffs on cars because I'm having a real problem. You may end up doing that. You may end up negotiating and being agreed, but then what they will say to you is, yes, but there is someone who is going to be suffering by that fact. You have to compensate that someone. Rules. These are rules of trade. If we don't have rules of trade, this country doesn't work, this trade doesn't work, these companies will not invest. Okay? So what you're going to be seeing in this document more and more is all that concept, okay? Oops. The most favored nation clause, Article 1st, historical perspective, multilateralization, free riding. What is a free rider?
Somebody that takes advantage of others.
Okay? And so these are the concepts that you will have to look and read, okay? Because in the end, what we're talking about is, you hear about free riding because exports of tables from country Z will benefit from a binding of 125. This is an example of tables, okay? Ad valorem in country B, or even a lower applied tariff. And this even if no concessions were given by country Z during the bilateral negotiations. So this implies I'm not going to be giving any concessions on this specific thing, and therefore that is not going to be included in the whole process, But because you two guys agreed to reduce tariffs on the imports of my products, I am going to be getting the benefit given the clause of most favored nation. And so many countries get into this sense of, let's take a free ride. I don't have to give anything because they will negotiate, and then I will get everything I want, but I don't have to give because I didn't negotiate. Yeah?
Can you put an example?
Yeah. Let's say that I'm a country which produces a lot of corn, yeah? And it only has two industries. It has corn and iron, okay? This is all it produces. And there are other two countries. This is country A. You have country B, which produces corn and many other things. And country C, which produces many other things. This country and this country, B and C, sit together. And he says to him, in order for me to give you concession on, I don't know, whatever you like, perfumes or whatever you want, okay? And reduce tariffs on this product, I want you to reduce tariffs on corn. For this country, it's very important, perfumes. So he says, okay, fine, I will reduce tariffs on corn from 20% to 0%. Okay? And he will say, okay, in exchange for that, I'm going to give you 0% in perfumes and whatever. Okay? This is the reciprocity. And this is the bilateral negotiation between these two countries. Once they have agreed to this in corn and to this in perfumes, these guys are going to get it without offering any similar concession. Okay? And so what they say is fine, this is great. Because now, given the most favored nation treatment, corn will get into your country at 0 and perfume 0. If I produce any of those, I can now send them there, but I don't need to agree that I also have 0, because I never agreed to that. But if you agree and you put it into practice, you have to include me because of the most favored nation clause. What am I doing? I am a free rider. I didn't offer anything in exchange, and I got 0. Okay? Now, I'm a good producer of corn, so I have no problem. I'm going to have 0 tariff for corn either, but you know, I'm really the best producer. But I didn't have to offer anything from my schedule of products. And I got my concession, and I didn't need to give anything in exchange. So, great. I'm happy now because I can send corn. And I'm not worried about corn because I'm the best producer, the low-cost producer in the world of corn. Okay? So it's a free rider, and that creates a lot of problems in negotiations because people are watching what's happening and see, well, if I can get anything free, why should I put anything in there? Okay?
But shouldn't countries, because it's a multilateral agreement, all say, okay, so we agree it's 0 on corn, so all of us are going to have 0 on corn?
Yeah, we all have 0.
He's going to have 0?
Yeah. Because he's the least cost producer of corn in the world. Okay? But what he wants right now is, no problem, bring corn, it won't sell. But let me tell you what's going to happen. I'm going to sell a lot of corn here and here. And then they will say, wait, what did you give in exchange for that? Nothing, because I didn't negotiate anything, okay? I'm a free rider.
It's the same barrier for all countries.
Mm. Yeah.
So if we agree that cars have 0, then there won't be any tariffs all around the world.
If it is in the multilateral round, okay? If you and I agree on a regional trade agreement, then we are discriminating. And the only rule there is, if we used to have 20%, we cannot now say to the rest of the countries, now you have 80%. We will keep 20% for the others. But between you and I, 0. That's fine. That was a bilateral agreement allowed under the rules for RTAs or PTAs. Okay? As I do that, I'm finding it more convenient then to negotiate with you on a bilateral or plurilateral rather than in a multilateral way. Because the multilateral way, yes, everybody will have to go to zero. So what's happened is two kinds of negotiations. One's where I really don't want to have this free rider situation, and what I do then is I negotiate on a special package. People are saying, but that's wrong for the world, okay? Because what that does is you remain being inefficient, because even if he was a free rider, because he's the low-cost producer in the world, that would have been a benefit for everybody. But you didn't do it in a multilateral negotiation. You did the negotiation on a bilateral regional trade agreement. Then he is excluded. But I did it in a multilateral. Tough luck, he is included. And therefore it's a free riding problem. And it's a problem because if he perceives that it's very strong the need between these two to do that, then he can sit in his, basically on his table and do nothing until it happens. And sometimes you really get upset about that because you can see all these little countries which are doing nothing. This is a less developing country, that's a different thing. He can go out and say, using the enabling clause, I'm going to be opening my market for corn, but I'm going to be opening in a different schedule as the one that you are going to be open. Okay? Questions? Okay, I'm going to send you this document, and I want you to read it, okay? It's only 32 minutes, diapositives. What you're going to be finding here will avoid us to go through all the legal documents and everything else, because basically what I found by reading it, by looking at it, is it gives you the whole explanation of everything in these footnotes, if you can call it that way. But what is also very important is that it gives you the concepts which are central. Okay? And you see, it only has 20 pages, so that's nice. 20 multiplied by 6, that's about 120 pages, but that's okay. So each one of these is about 6 pages, yeah? Any questions on that? Okay, then we only have one final thing. And then we will go back to class later on, which is this. These are the teams that we put together. Are they right or are they wrong? They're right? Okay. The next class, I want you to bring me what will be your topic for the paper. Okay? You have to give me, not the name, you have to give me the name and the objective, what you are going to be looking for by writing that paper. No more than 15 pages, okay? I want to teach you to be concrete, very specific. And I need that because we need now to start a process where I will be reviewing your paper until the end, okay? So there is the name. We are now in agreement that is right.